Within our solar system are pressures, temperatures, and densities undreamed of by man because miscalculated by him from unit pressures of this planet with which he is familiar. Even man's instruments have deceived him in his calculations, for they but translate states of motion in which units of comparison are but relative, though true in ratio. Man measures the density of the sun by its rigidity as compared with that of our planet. The sun is therefore given as 1/4 the density of our planet. It is quite appropriate to state the density of our planet as 5 times that of water on our planet, because the water is part of the planet and subject to the same pressures of our orbital position. Our planet is in a different pressure compartment from that of any other mass. Not so, however, can he compare the pressures or densities of another planet with ours. Relatively, yes, but the low relative pressure and potential, which allows rigidity here, would vaporize our expanded Earth at the surface of the sun. If removed to Mercury's orbit, our Earth would become white hot, and when it cooled it would be approximately the size of Mercury. On the other hand, the vapor which arises from a steam exhaust in a day would furnish ample material for the solid head and steaming tail of a conspicuous comet if it were removed to the low pressure zones of the type of comet whose orbit is in a plane at an angle of 50 degrees to the solar ecliptic, and whose aphelion exceeds twice Neptune's distance from the sun. That large cloud floating high up in the cold or upper atmospheric low pressure would be but a quart or two when compressed into water lower down. The albedo, or light reflecting quality, of a cloud of our planet is not to be taken as a standing unit of albedo measurement for a lower pressure zone far removed. Laws governing the measurements in ratios of standard units of distant pressures, temperatures, and densities, and their translation into standard units familiar to us, will be written down when further consideration of this universe of purely mechanical motion makes it logical to consider its mathematics. It is necessary at this point to describe briefly the basic principles governing pressures. Pressure is that relative state of opposed force necessary to sustain the illusion of relative density of substance in motion. The dimensionless universe of inertia is absolutely stable. The universe of motion is a corpuscular universe of varying but relative density, which simulates the appearance of stability through motion. The varying power of mass to appear to attract mass causes an appearance of variation of the pressure dimensions of all masses. Man classifies masses of various densities as gases, liquids, and solids. The density or tenuity of any mass is in proportion to its preponderance of pressure opposition. Like all other effects of motion, pressure has its opposites. The opposites of pressure are the electric pressure of contraction and the magnetic pressure of expansion. One pulls inward from within, the other pushes outward from within. One attracts mass by drawing it closer together. The other repels mass by separating it. The greater the positive charge, the greater the pressure of contraction. The greater the pressure of contraction, the less the volume. The greater the negative discharge, the greater the pressure of expansion. The greater the pressure of expansion, the less the volume. All mass is corpuscular, and all mass is relatively solid. All solid mass has first been melted by the friction of the active opposition of the two pressures, and has then been frozen into the state of relative rigidity by the locking of the opposing pressures into inactive potential positions. Great solidity means less axial activity. Great solidity also means preponderance of contraction pressure toward high potential. Great axial activity means less solidity. Great axial activity also means preponderance of expansion pressure toward low potential. Melt a bar of iron and it becomes axially active. It becomes less solid. Vaporize it by expansion, pressure, and its axial activity multiplies. Also, its volume has increased enormously, for centrifugal activity demands space in which to display its activity. The heavy solid bar of iron will now no longer drop to the ground, but on the contrary will rise into the air. What has happened to cause so great a change? Let us first repeat the definition. Pressure is that relative state of opposed force necessary to sustain the illusion of relative density of substance in motion. Pressures have been reversed. High contraction pressures have become preponderantly expansive. High potential has become low potential. Low axial activity has become great axial activity. Restricted volume has become extended volume. Great density has become low density. That which is called weight has entirely disappeared as far as the gravitational effect of this planet is concerned. Its weight in respect to this planet of high potential has been reduced to the same relative weight as other mass of lower potential. The expanded mass of iron now falls of its own weight toward low pressures, just as it rises from this planet because of its loss of weight. The bar of iron is no longer heavy in respect to this planet, nor is it hard, compact, rigid, or dense. Its particles no longer cohere as a solid of man's concept. It passes through the equilibrium of this planet's sea level pressure of 15 pounds per square inch, in which state it has no apparent weight, and still continues to expand until its low density forces it to fall toward the low pressures appropriate to low density. Its mass, however, does not change, only its dimensions change. In lowering its density by reversing its pressures and potential, its axial activities are increased, its orbital activities decreased, thus reducing its ability to attract. On the contrary, it develops a strong ability to repel. It can no longer hold together as a piece of iron. The voltage and amperage of the little oscillating electromagnetic opposing pressure pumps of which it is constructed are lowered. By increasing its volume, the distance between each corpuscle is increased so that their apparent ability to attract each other decreases. Increased volume also decreases surface tension pressure, a quality which belongs in relative degree to all mass. Increased volume and decreased surface tension pressure means increased vapor pressure. Decreased surface tension pressure lessens the ability of mass to attract and to cohere. Increased surface tension pressure means greater density or solidity, also it means greater ability to attract. Solidity is an increasingly unstable condition of matter due to increasing electric pressures developed by repetitive series of explosive disturbances in inertia. The greater the disturbance, the greater the effort necessary to produce it. The greater the effort, the greater the opposition to the effort by an equal and opposite resisting pressure. The greater the resistance, the greater the heat generated by the contact of the two oppositely flowing streams. The greater the heat, the less the relative solidity for that respective pressure. The greater the incandescence, the greater the radiation of heat by expulsion. The greater the expulsion by radiation, the more solid, dense, and rigid the radiating substance. The more rigid a substance is, the more true it is to its own plane of pressure. The more true to plane, the more gyroscopic the motion of its particles. The more gyroscopic the motion of its particles, the more apparently stable the mass.